You're
All right. This is the values-based mindset experience, and we are with one of the unofficial founders of the entire movement, Larry Levine. And
Garrison, the unofficial founder.
unofficial founder, like, because like you were, or at least a head therapist, right? Head therapist, right? So anyways, we want to welcome you to the podcast. Larry, I can't say too much without weeping and seeming unmanly, but why don't you go ahead and tell the people who you are?
I was hoping you'd do that for me, Garrison. Come on.
Larry is the foremost sales expert on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. Right. And so if you're watching this on YouTube, you're seeing the selling from the heart propaganda. It's not propaganda. It's the real deal. I remember when Larry got started with this. How many years was it? 4 years ago we first started chatting.
I always call it, Mike, I was forced into entrepreneurship.
That's right.
4.5, almost 5 years ago.
Yeah, we met through LinkedIn. Like, I think
exactly.
I commented on one of your posts, which I thought was amazing, and you responded, and like we did what you teach, right? We got to know each other. So tell the people for sure, like, what's your biggest passion?
I think, wow, I have a lot, but I think the biggest passion is bringing sincerity. I call it bringing sincerity, substance, and heart back to the sales profession. And I'm saying this for a reason. I always say I'm a sales geek at heart. I love everything about sales. I truly believe it is a profession, but in order to live that profession and lead that lifestyle, you have to do certain things. And I held myself accountable to all these things my whole entire career. And that's why when I was forced into entrepreneurship, I said, you know what? I'm going to take what made me, me, and I'm going to bring this to the forefront, and I'm going to push the envelope and push the message in a little bit and say the things that need to be said, not to disrespect anybody, Mike, and not to cast dark shadows of doubt throughout the profession. It's just say, hey, listen, there's a massive difference between how you're viewed versus how you'd like to be viewed. And if that matters, and we already know that, unfortunately, perception's reality. The sales world's got a bad rap, and rightfully so, Mike, because the sales world's done it to themselves. I was cognizant of that my whole entire sales career. And that enabled me to kind of thrive and survive in a chaotic world. I was willing to do the things that most in sales weren't willing to do. And that was place my heart, emotions, caring, respect, love right up onto the business table, right up on my sleeves. I walked it, talked it, and breathed it.
And that is exactly why you're here on the podcast. So for everybody that's listening, all three of you, hopefully a lot more, but you know, Larry is one of the reasons.
Well, come on, Mike.
Okay,
you got me on here because you said you had this massive freaking network. Come on, Garrison.
Well, I was just talking about weight. No.
You know, I love you. I just had to go there.
No, it's like, but seriously, you know, when we get down to it, you know, both of our passions and the way we approach it is no different from an ethical, moral standpoint. But like we each got a twist, but there's a couple things that people need to know. Larry and I made our bones in the hardest sales profession there is. I don't want to hear about encyclopedias. I don't want to hear about knives. We're talking copiers. Nothing is harder than selling copiers. And that's kind of how we first met. Like you were talking, I think it was some post about copiers. I was like, oh, I know about that. And we got to know each other. But when you get down to it, selling from the heart, and the reason you're on the podcast is because if anybody reads that book, and everyone should, you should all read the book. It's all about values and about not only discovering what your values are as a salesperson, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a professional, but then living out those values. And that's why you're here, Larry, because you've been such a support for me, and because I knew you all the way along, right? There's zero question in my mind about your values and about whether or not you will do what is necessary to live out your values.
No, and I appreciate it. And I'm a big believer that, especially in the world today, that how you connect and how you relate to somebody is so mission critical, but it's what you do with it, right? It's
Totally.
what you do with that. And I want your listeners to key in on something because it would have been really easy, Mike, when we first met. You commented on a blog, right? You commented on an article and we connected. It would have been really simple and would have been really easy just to go on both of our merry ways.
Totally.
But we chose to take it one step farther. And I'm a big believer in this, that if somebody engages in a heartfelt way with my content, my message, what I believe in, I'm going to engage back. I'm going to be intentional with it. And that's how we built this relationship that is near and dear. I mean, I love you like a brother, and I want everyone to realize I have never personally met Mike Garrison.
It's so weird.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah,
We literally communicate almost every day via social. We communicate maybe once every other week via phone and maybe once a month in a deep dive conversation.
totally.
But if the way you connect and the way you relate to somebody instantaneously upon that very first meeting, whether that be a connection on social, whether that be a referral from a friend, whether that be an email message, all that plays out in how somebody feels about you and views you. And I was cognizant about that, Mike, and I brought it to the forefront because you alluded to, I came out of the copier channel my whole life. Nothing wrong with it, right? I mean, it's dog eat dog. I always say it's a little bit dysfunctional and laggard in nature, but
Little bit.
just a little bit. But it's highly competitive, highly commoditized. It's, use the expression, it's dog eat dog. But everybody walks, talks, and acts the same.
Mm-hmm.
I just found that the key to my success, and I learned this early on in my 20s, is to act completely polar opposite of the perception that everybody has of salespeople. And I'm a big believer that you're a product of how you were raised. And I don't, we can get deep in this if you want, but just in its simplest format, you're a product of how you're raised. Well, to stick up for salespeople, I believe salespeople are a product of the environment they're raised in. And sometimes they just know no better because that's their surroundings.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really down the road. It'll be fascinating for me to have the values-based mindset experience conversation with organizations and talk about what role culture plays in the individual values-based decisions that their employees make across the organization. So let's get two values. You ready?
Yeah, but okay, but I'm just gonna
Jump on it. Take it.
But here's the things, because everybody, and I know we're going to talk about it. I can almost rest assured we're going to talk about it. But what are values, right? Everyone says I'm here to be a value, but what is it?
Well, that is the thing, is like we've become, everybody wants the easy button. And I understand, like, you don't know how long you're going to be alive. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so the temptation is always to try and bring value. But I would hold that if you're not connected individually and directly to your written values, where you know exactly who and what you're about and what really counts, that you're going to have a really hard time being consistent with being of value.
I mean, true, because you've heard the expression, well, you know what? Excuse me, Mike, I'm just being me, right?
Right.
It's an expression, right? We all know, we're all guilty of it because we've used it. Well, I'm just being me. Well, who are you?
Yeah.
I mean, I did some deep soul searching to really uncover this, because I'm harder on myself, Mike. You already know it because we've had deep discussions about it. Your listeners don't, but I'm harder on myself than anybody. I call it mental gymnastics, but I work on me probably sometimes too much to my detriment,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm so hypercritical of who I am and how I carry myself.
Well, you
get what I'm saying?
I suffer from the same thing. And here's the reality, like, I don't have to be the most values-based person to be the founder of, or the, kind of evangelist for being values-based. And the same thing with selling from the heart. It's like, I think some of the pressure you and I put on each other, or not on each other, but ourselves, is like, I sometimes feel like I've got to be the best embodiment of a values-based person there is. And that's just not realistic, because then I'm trying to be something I'm not. Like being me is not making excuses for bad behavior. It's being willing to do the work inside to take care of myself, to understand who I am, so I can actually be consistent with other people.
Yeah, and here's let me take this one step farther, if you allow me to.
Sure.
Is I think what drove me in working on, I always say that there's two things that we work on, and those that choose to read Selling from the Heart or have already read Selling from the Heart, they're going to understand this. The ones that have read it, the ones who haven't, you're gonna start uncovering what the inner game is. And I'm going to preface this: I have no PhD in psychology. I have no master's, no doctorate in human behavior, anything like that. I always say I got my PhD from getting the crap kicked out of me selling copiers my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And we've laughed about it, but in all sincerity, I think the reason why, and that's keen on this, because I'm a massive believer that we're products of how we were raised. And I think what fueled me and what still fuels me to this day, and is I grew up in a household. I love my parents dearly, though my relationship with my father is massively dysfunctional. I've come to grips with it the older that I've got. I came to grips with it in writing Selling from the Heart and really uncovering who I was, Mike. But you have to realize the reason why I say some of the things that I do is I had to grow up with a dad who was a rocket scientist for the United States Air Force. So he had a PhD in aeronautical physics by the time he was 20 from 2 Ivy League schools. He graduated high school at 16. And, you know, that's just, he held certain things to a high degree of accountability. And there was no non-negotiables when it came to education and how you carried yourself and all that. That's what I had to grow up with. Well, at a certain point in time, like all of us do, we rebel.
Yes.
And I rebelled against it. And I hated school. I hated everything about school. I mean, if I got a 2.1, 2.2 in high school, I was like stoked. And I went to college because, right, I had to live up to certain standards. I really didn't want to go. It was like, if I didn't go, I'd let my parents down.
Right.
And I think I got like a 2.1, maybe even 2.0 in college, but I got the degree just to say, hey, you know what? I did it. But but I was never book smart. I was street smart. And furthermore, I love the art behind the conversation and really getting to know somebody, where that was one thing that I hate to say it, that I can layer over my dad and say, hey, I'm better at you. I'm better at this than you are. That's what fuels me. What's that?
Does your dad have a bestseller?
No.
Just saying.
But you see, I bring this up because it ties into what we're talking about, Mike. Totally. Is the values that I was raised with as a kid, though sometimes I rebelled against it. It wasn't until I was older that I started to value education. I started to value self-accountability, self-worth, figuring things out for myself. See where I'm going? Those were all the things that I was raised with that I didn't realize would form where I'm at now. And I started to uncover that throughout my sales career. And it was probably 5 or 6 years into my sales career that it started to click. And it's the value, because I'm a firm believer your values change the older you get.
Let's unpack that. So what do you mean by that? I'm not going to disagree with you.
No. I think they're constantly changing. And here's why. Because the things that I value today, Mike, are completely different than I valued 20 and 30 years ago.
And why is that?
Maturity, thinking differently. And I'm going to tell you a couple of them.
And I'm not disagreeing with you.
But I'm just saying, but for somebody to say my values as a 25-year-old or 30-year-old are still my values of today, maybe the inner core ones are, right? I value community service. I value giving back. I value helping others. I value seeing people succeed based on the knowledge that I impart on them. But guess
Sure.
what? Those weren't my values when I was in my 20s.
Well, those, so there's two, just subtly, right? There's things that we value, like community involvement, stuff like that. And then there's values that we have. And so, and they're not always completely different. You know, like service is a value, like you believe in service. But what's interesting is I think that the internal values stay the same, because I do believe that you've got a pattern from when you were younger. Like, I've read enough about psychology, I've been in enough 12-step groups, you know, you've got a pattern that you're taught. But I do believe the definition changes. And I think that it changes in two ways. Number one, sometimes we get values imprinted upon us, which are false, which maybe not were malicious by our parents, but they were values that, like, hey, you're dumb. I have friends that were told they were dumb, right? And so they had this internal script that told them they were dumb when they were clearly brilliant. But as they got older, as they matured, the evidence started to pile up against it. And I think that what happens as you get older, and it's different from person to person, I think that especially as you go through some adversity, I think you have an opportunity to either, I call it the warm, fuzzy blanket of denial.
Yeah.
Like, you get in these moments where you have to really decide whether you want to take the red pill or the blue pill from the Matrix.
Yeah.
Right. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people take the blue pill and they go back in and they just try and ignore what their soul's telling them, you know, and they wrap up in that blanket and they cover themselves and they just hope that somehow they make it to the end. Or you take the red pill and you're like, I had some adversity. In my case, you know, my son was born extremely premature. It took me a long time not to recover from it, but it took me a long time to finish growing enough to be able to understand what that meant for everything I thought I had been, what I was, and what I thought I was going to be. So I think you're right. I think your definition expands or contracts. I don't think you can get rid of where you came from, but the voice can grow louder or it can grow softer.
Yeah. And that's why one of my favorite sayings, Mike, is the stories in our head are the stories that we tell. And then we go out and act those stories.
Absolutely.
And I've been guilty as heck of conjuring up stories in my head that I go out and I act out. But what's really interesting is, I want to go back to this, if you allow me, is those whole perception.
Sure.
Is that's what one of my big values is, perception. I'm totally cognizant and aware of perception. And I'm a big believer we can control it.
So when you say perception, you talk about your perception of what other people think of you, or your perception of what?
Both.
Yeah. So
both, because it's interesting, because one of my favorite questions I always love asking sales leaders and salespeople is, how are you perceived in the market? Right?
So stop right there. If you're listening to this, write that question down. Larry, say it again.
How are you perceived in the market, in your marketplace? Right now, we can insert in, right? How are you perceived if you're in, like Mike, you know, you're in financial services and so forth. So how are you perceived as a financial service professional in your marketplace?
We just don't want to talk about that right now.
But here's what's interesting and why I ask, because I learned this a long time ago, is the perception is totally different. So now if I flip this around a little bit and I ask the same question in a different way, how would you like to be perceived in the marketplace?
Totally.
And what you're going to hear is two totally different responses. And that's why I said, okay, then you have to have enough right? I'm going to call it the Jewish word. You got to have enough chutzpah inside of you, enough self-worth to say, okay, I value myself so much that I'm going to change the perception of how I'm viewed in the marketplace.
So let's
And
stay.
that, and that's why when I wrote Selling from the Heart, I wrote it in such a way that if you don't, Mike, you and I talk about this all the time, that if you're not willing to do the inner work, the inner heart work, the HEART, the heart work, the outer part, right? I think you'll struggle with it all the time. There'll always be misalignment.
Well, it's like the problem with lying a lot is you have to remember all the lies. And I think it's the same thing with what you're talking about. I think that most people, when they're asked that question by you, what's your perception in the marketplace, don't really know, because they've never, really thought about it. Like they just kind of were doing, they were just working, doing, hoping it's going to work out. And some people, when hope is your strategy,
It's not really a strategy.
well, it's just hard to replicate, right? So the problem I see as a business coach, like that's my identity, I'm a coach, is people so often fail to continue to grow because they have no idea how they got to their current level of success other than trying really hard. Well, if trying really hard got you to your first $100,000 in commission, how do you improve your effort when you maxed out? And you can't. And that's where I think values come back into it. And the story I'll tell is, like, for some of my clients, they're making more than enough money. They don't need more money. They want to continue making more money. But the other values, as they've gotten older, the other values that they hold that are initially weren't as valuable as security. That's usually what drove a lot of these people, is they had families and they just wanted to be secure. They wanted to have enough income to be able to believe that everything's going to be okay, even though they know they're not in charge. Then it switches to family, right? I want a different relationship with my family. I don't want to just be at work all the time. And all of a sudden, and my buddy Matt Churchill, who was the first guinea pig for values-based mindset. You were the therapist, but he was the guinea pig, right? And you really were the therapist. People don't need to know how many times you talked me off the ledge, but it's okay, right? The therapist or the firefighter, right? It's okay. It's okay, Mr. Garrison, come back inside, But Matt talks about this, and it's really important. I wanted to run it by you. One of the things that I think happens when you don't take the time to do the work inside your heart, folks, if you haven't figured out that Larry and I really believe in what each other are doing, just keep listening. When you don't take the time to write down who and what you believe and what you are, all of a sudden these different aspects of your values can be competitive. Like a heart divided, like a house divided must fall. And Matt made a really good case about how sometimes a value that got you to a certain point, once you get to that point, if you don't have another value that's perhaps competing with it, it's going to get out of control. So like for him, security was so important because he came from some tougher places. But then once he became successful, then anxiety came along. Hey, what if it goes away? Am I good enough? And all these things. So what do you think about that concept of competing values?
Well, you bring up some really good points. So to your buddy Matt's point, right? Full disclosure, I still suffer from some of those things that you just brought up.
Me too.
And I think we're human, right? And to say that we're not in conflict with them, then people would not be being truthful to themselves, right? But I think about this all the time. One of the things that I hold near and dear to me and that I value the most is I love imparting what I read. I love imparting my knowledge. I like imparting my wisdom on others.
Sure.
To help them become better. But then what I constantly fight with is, well, was that good enough?
Right.
Right.
Totally.
How did what I say make that person feel? And it's really interesting because I believe that we all have aha moments throughout our whole life, right? There's no way 8, 9, 10 years ago I would have ever dreamt, Mike, if our paths crossed 10 years ago and said, you asked me a question, hey Larry, I want you to think 10 years from now. Do you think you would have written a book, started a podcast, and built out a whole brand and a movement around something called selling from the heart? And I would have said no, and I would have inserted some other words before it that we just don't want to say. But you get my point. Is I think sometimes when we have aha moments and we're forced into some uncomfortable things, pretty soon a different set of values or value come to the forefront. And I say this because the things that I've learned the last 4.5, 5 years are completely different than I learned the previous past 5 years. If that makes any sense.
Complete sense.
Because so it's interesting. I went through we had a guest on the Selling from the Heart podcast, my gosh, maybe 2-3 months ago. And part of the perks of podcasting is you get nice little thank you gifts. We give them out, but in return, we get them back. And I spent some time with a gentleman who walked me through uncovering my authentic identity.
Mm.
And what was really interesting is we started touching on values and things like that. So I'm actually going to reach over here because I got to share because I think this really hones in on because I keep them with me, and it's totally insane. But he started talking about, that I love pragmatic, so here's some of the things that he uncovered, the value and the values behind me is I love pragmatic accountability, right?
Confirm. I confirm that.
Self-accountability, right?
Oh, yeah.
My synthetic motivators, nurturing relationships, right? I like to share what I've learned and listen to help others become better as part of my relationship building. This is all what's really interesting because it kind of unpacks value and values, right? That my social type and what I value is introspective. Isn't that interesting?
It's totally true.
And that where I get chaos and all that, and I really try to keep it to the forefront, is when I lose control of things. So one of my values is, sorry, I just put it back. Okay. I love to control time, and I try not to let time get away from me. I value process. I value, that self-accountability and really becoming a master of my time. But then, my big downfall is one of the things that I guess I devalue sometimes is myself because I pour myself into work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's good stuff. See, I was talking to Matt this morning, actually, believe it or not, and I was getting a little bit of direction. We're getting ready to roll out something big. I've told you about it. Everybody else, it'll be coming out soon. And he just said, he goes, Mike, you just got to make sure you focus on just helping other people. Like that's the thing for you. Whenever you start worrying too much about, am I a good business owner? Have I done all of the business scaling stuff right? He goes, you just get off in the weeds. He goes, just go help people. And that was real powerful for me, because when you get down to it, for all of this stuff for me comes out of a desire to help people have enough headspace to tap into what real freedom is, right? And real freedom has nothing to do with dollar bills, and stuff like that. Real freedom.
Okay. So now take what you just said and take that out in the sales world right? And that's where, and that's the big disconnect, right? And that's what I want people to think is, right? If you ask, it's just an article I just wrote, right? I just wrote it. And if you go ask many in sales, why'd you get into sales? And they will tell you, it's the money derivative, right?
Totally. That's what they're told they should join sales for.
Exactly. But I remember this goes back to one of my very first podcasts I was on years and years and years ago. The podcast host said, Larry, in one short, concise sentence, I want you to define sales. And I said, simple. In my opinion, sales is about the art of the help, period.
Yeah, I mean, I answer it very similarly. I mean, for me, sales is helping someone get something they want or need. Right? The art of the help. It's interesting because like when I got into sales, it was because a guy that owned a copier dealership somehow got hooked up with the dude that taught public relations at George Mason University, where I'm from, and did a speech on networking.
Okay.
And so like I was really interested in speech communication and how people think and stuff like that. I had never really done sales, and I was all about it. I bugged this dude, Mike Hoover from TML Copiers and Business Machines, Manassas, Virginia, baby, and right outside of DC. And when I showed up, of course, I had a cold call, right? So it's like, hey, man, I thought we were going to network. Well, like you have to, I didn't have a network, so I had to get out there and I had to beat the street and get to know people. But he also taught me how to network. And then I got involved with, Business Network International, met a lot of people. But when you look at all those things, let's talk about this, because any value that we're going to talk about reference selling from the heart is probably going to be a value that's near and dear to you, Larry. So when you think about one of the key values that you and selling from the heart share, what is it?
Sincerity.
Sincerity. So number one, totally, like, I know you well enough. That's it. Right. We will meet each other someday. We just don't want to cry in public yet. So it could happen. And I'm a hugger. So we definitely can't meet during COVID because I would violate all rules. Stuff like Quarantine. It's a great song by Matt Best. Little shout out for Black Record. But sincerity. Roll out. What does sincerity mean to you? And how does sincerity play in, good and bad, in selling from the heart?
I think you gotta say it and do it. You gotta mean it, walk it, talk it, live it, breathe it. It's how you deliver it. It's the conviction, right? It's the conciseness. It's the clarity in your message. Call it a sixth sense, Mike, but people smell it. People smell sincerity.
And the opposite.
But conversely, they're going to smell the complete opposite if it's just an act or something like that. So I remember, I want to play on this because I remember I'm probably at a quarter of the way into writing Selling from the Heart. And I got called out on the carpet on my book, and I was prepared for it, right? I was prepared for some of the backlash I might receive by writing a book, selling in heart and all that stuff, but so be it, right? So somebody asked me to connect, and obviously I accepted the connection request, and we started, I'm going to condense the message for time's sake.
Sure.
But so I accepted the connection request and said, hey, if I can be a resource to you, please let me know. Small talk, small talk, small talk. And then the hook started to come out. And the hook was, can you tell me, the case studies and the research you're putting into writing the book, Selling from the Heart? And that's when I said, hey, full disclosure, right? No PhD, no master's, right? Mine came from getting the what kicked out of me selling copiers in the LA marketplace. But I'm going to bring what I believe are some of the missing links to the forefront in sales and relationship building, all the things that I believe we bring in our personal relationships that we fail to bring in our professional relationships. Either buy the book or don't, right?
Right.
Small talk, small talk, small talk. Then this person leaves with, you know what, I'm going to leave you with a word. And it's called deception. All I ask is that you don't deceive the readers. And I said, listen, I lead the lifestyle. Buy the book, don't buy the book, right? Because this person went on to say there's so many books around EQ, EI, all this, that people have capitalized on it, but do they lead the lifestyle? Are they connected to the message is where I'm driving with this, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
And then long story short, the book comes out, and this person's actually tweeting sections of my book out, which means this person bought the book. And then, we're connected. We've exchanged pleasantries. We talk on the phone and all that. But I share this for one reason. Think about that story just now. And when you bring sincerity to the forefront, is there deception behind it? Are you trying to get what you want so you act like that? Or are you truly there because you have that person's best interest at heart? And you're truly there to help. And that's why one of the lines in my manifesto at the end of Selling from the Heart, I said, we must lead with our heart and not the wallet. When we lead with the wallet, there's deception in there.
100%.
Always.
Commission breath. So,
Yes.
so rank. It's really good. And, you know, I think the problem with sincerity is we can produce it and mean it, but people sometimes get cynical and bitter. You know, they've seen enough people out there, especially on social where you're a big voice. They say so many people out there on social talking about how great they are and how amazing their unique method is. And what I love most, and the reason why I encourage everyone to get Selling from the Heart, is like, there's no golden ticket to your process. Your process is not, you know, putting on a new suit or something like that. In fact, it's going inside, deeply connecting with who and what you are. And like, you can sell from the heart with anything. It's not just for copier salespeople. It's not just for multinational corporations. You can sell from the heart in a pawn shop, don't you think?
It's anywhere. It really is. And what I'm a big believer in, and now if we layer in that we live in this socially connected, digitally driven world, Mike, it's how you and I connected, right?
Totally.
I'm all about authentically connecting to yourself first, authentically connect out in the social world, the digital world, build authentic relationships based on authentic conversations. And that's why I've always said this, and I will say it again and again and again. Authenticity is a lifestyle. It's not a light switch.
Yeah,
And to me, it's there's no silver bullet though, people. And I don't want to take this down the social rabbit hole, but there's so many people that have just convoluted this whole concept of social selling, right? I mean, I started my sales career, Mike, in 1988, the beginning of 1988. We were social selling back then. This was before the internet.
yeah.
This is before all of that. To me, I'll kind of, I'll phrase, you know, one of the best books I ever read, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. The
Amazing.
core foundation of that book is building relationships and changing the way people think. I was doing that pre-internet, pre-digital. The same thing's happening today. The tools have changed. It's about building relationships and changing the way people think. I want to, you know, I'm a big, huge fan of Brene Brown. And I remember in her gifts of, yeah, I'd freaking love her. And she talks about, you know, in the gifts of imperfection, that social, and she doesn't say it this way, but this is how I interpret it, is social is a big fantasy land. People act on social as they don't act off social. And I learned a long time ago in corporate sales, you get what you get with me. There's no, because I write about it in Selling from the Heart, there's so much misalignment going on that, you know, when I connect to somebody, is that the real you or is that a different version of you? Well, when you connect with Larry Levine, there is no difference. You get what you get, whether you meet me in an airport, whether you meet me in the freaking middle of the street somewhere, whether we have a phone conversation or where we're online. It don't matter. You get what you get.
Yeah,
And it's all about connect and relate.
even the bad stuff like the LA sports teams, even that stuff you get.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Everybody,
We won't go there, Mike.
we're recording this the day after the Dodgers made it to the World Series. So Larry's a little tired. Check it out on YouTube. So you said something very powerful, right? And the way you talk about authenticity is the way I talk about excellence. And the hardest thing in the world to do, especially in the developed world, you know, like in America and Canada, United Kingdom, places like that, Australia, you think of the civilized world, is so often we are wasting immense amounts of energy being average when average is what is required. And so we're being two-faced. We're doing all these different things. You can find out when people go to a restaurant, that's when you find out if you're trying to look good or if you're still an asshole, right? Because it's going to come out. So here's the thing and if you ask me, what is values-based mindset experience about? It's about being involved in a community, being involved in a movement that helps you do what is almost impossible, which is to prepare with excellence so that when excellence is required, you can be excellent. Because in the moment, you can't be authentic in the moment when you most need to be authentic, when the opportunities are the greatest or the challenges are the highest, if you haven't built it over time. I was hearing that from you, that authenticity is a process that you have to do even when no one will check on you. You still have to be authentic.
Yes, yes, and that's why, again, and I have no, I keep saying, I know I keep saying this over and over again, but I'm not bringing any science or scientific research or anything like that. I'm a firm believer we're all authentic. I believe that in my heart, we're all authentic. It's a decision on, is that what we're going to do or not do? Are we going to lead our life like that? And that's why I said people smell it, right? The minute you flip that light switch on, people smell it because there's so much lack of trust throughout the whole world when it comes to working with people or listening to people, right? There's so much rampant mistrust. And that's the whole selling from the heart movement is, hey, listen, if you want to change perception, bring the things that are near and dear to people, which is love, care, respect, appreciation.
And do it consistently.
Passion, caring.
Yeah, and do it consistently. I think that what people don't understand, and this all gets into psychology. By the way, everyone's a scientist, just some people have degrees and some people don't, right?
Yeah.
We're all scientists, right? Science isn't owned by academics or universities, right? Or labs. Science is science. I would say this is like, one of the things you learn when you do a lot of behavioral profiling of people is you start to understand how much of a difference it takes in the energy expenditure, emotionally and cognitively, for people to try and be something they aren't. And so it's not about like, I'm not super detail oriented. Doesn't mean I don't care about details. It just means that for me to do very intricate detail work, I have to expend a massive amount of energy, which there's always a cost. Like Larry, go run a marathon and then try and do your podcast, right? You're going to be exhausted. I think that's what people have been lied to, that by trying to fit into another person's concept or society's concept of what is good at social selling or what is good at being an investment advisor or even a parent, like you can get yourself in a situation where you're, through good intentions, even if you're misguided, you are wearing yourself to such a frazzle that you forget who you really are. And then when you need to be you, when you need to be Larry, when I need to be Mike, we're too tired to let people in. And that's when all the wheels come off.
No, it's so true. And that's why, we always people love chasing shiny objects. They really do. They love chasing the shiny object and the shortcut. But I always say the shiny object you all should be chasing is staring at you in the mirror. And that's yourself.
Yeah.
Figure that out first.
Well, it's so interesting because I'm a Christian, not a great example of a Christian, but I'm a Christian, and like my faith, my value system tells me that every single human being is special and unique, right? Your circumstances vary widely, but like we're all we have, really. Like you come in and you leave on your own. You may have family and you may have different things, but at the end of the day, like one of the things that I know that I could not live with is to get to the end of my life and be in a hospital bed knowing that I was terminal in a couple of days or a week. I don't want to look back and see more regret. Like I'm going to see regret. You're always going to see where you fell short. But man, wherever I go at the end, I want to go knowing that at a certain point, my life became about consciously and purposefully figuring out who I was, what really counted to me. And then I always say this, and I want to bounce this off of you as we get near the end of this, right? What would it be like if you lived a life where the path you picked, no matter what the outcome, the path you picked, you knew you would always take it because it was your values, even if you didn't have the best outcome? What would it be like if after failure, you knew that everything you did, Larry, was what you believed to be the most important?
It's so interesting, because at the end of the book, at the end of Selling from the Heart, I talk about, Robert Frost, right? So there you go. You threw it in there,
Well, I
but
had to.
it's the path not taken. It's really interesting that being forced into entrepreneurship at 50 years old, I had to figure certain things out. However, what led me up to that formed where I'm at today. It may not have been that moment in time where I was forced into entrepreneurship, but it's the course of actions that happened 15 years, 10 years prior to that that led me up to this. And
Exactly.
I wouldn't be here today speaking with you if I didn't change the course of my events at 40 years old.
It's so completely true. And that is one of the advantages of getting older, is even though don't have as much energy per se, and you're older and achy, the advantage of being older, like if you're listening to this and you feel like it's too late, it's not. It is not too late, because what the world tells you is that, oh, since you're not starting at 20, you don't have enough time to do something great. And that is nothing but unmitigated bullshit. Like,
Yeah.
even if for 6 months you lived a life of your own design, it's worth it. It's like, why waste a minute? So we got just a couple minutes left. I got to get one thing from you. You ready?
Yeah.
People know that it's hard to live, to have integrity, and to do these things, right? And it's harder, I think, to live without it, but they're looking at the opposition, and you've experienced the opposition. Can you encourage people of what happens when you decide consciously to live out your values?
I think, well, a couple things. You become a lot more confident with yourself. You become a lot more happy. Um, I think your messaging becomes a lot clearer. Your relationships become a lot clearer.
Yeah.
You become a lot stronger. And it's the relationship you have with yourself. I mean, I'm the last 4.5, 5 years, though they've probably been some of the hardest moments of my life. They've been some of the most self-rewarding, because I found out what makes Larry Levine tick through this whole process. Mike, you and I have had some intimate conversations about it.
Yeah.
And what I value the most is, and I never thought in a million years, right, as we bring this to a close, I never thought in a million years that, I'd write Selling from the Heart and a few people would buy the book, right? But I didn't realize that it has now made a worldwide movement along with the podcast. And Mike, you've been there every step of the way, even before I even started writing Selling from the Heart, before the podcast even came out. But what I value the most is the message and the messages that I receive from people that said, you know what, this is how this book has transformed my life. Now, it's hyper focused into the sales world, but I've had friends that are not even in sales read the book and they go, it makes sense, right? Because the first half of the book is all inner work that you have to do.
Yeah. That's the secret, is sales is just a canvas which you paint your life upon.
Yeah.
Like, you get to pick the brush, you get to pick the paint, you get to and you paint it. And the neat thing is, it's an oil painting. So even if you make a mistake, you can still make something beautiful out of it. Your life's not a photograph.
Yeah.
Life's a painting. All right, Larry, I'm just going to go ahead and end it here real quick. I need you to tell people, like, you can go to Amazon and type in world's greatest book on sales, and Larry's book will come out. All right. But, Selling from the Heart. So we know the book, but where can they find out more about Selling from the Heart?
They can go to, you can go to sellingfromtheheart.net, and you can find out anything that you want about selling from the heart. There's resources, there's access to blogs, podcasts, there's a sales leadership page, there's a sales professionals page. It's just full of videos, it's full of content. If you want to get the book, you can get it in on Amazon on audio, paperback, and in Kindle format. If I shouldn't even say if, but you can pick up a smartphone and you can open your text messaging app. And if you text the word heart, HEART, if you text the word heart to 21,000, you get immediate access to free resources right to your phone.
It's huge. So just to let everybody know, Larry's got a really good friend named Daryl Amy, who's also involved with Selling from the Heart. I'm going to make Daryl come on the podcast, and we're just going to be slaying Larry. We're just going to crush Larry the whole time.
Well, that's okay, because if it wasn't for my wife and Daryl Amy, Selling from the Heart doesn't exist anyway. So
Totally. No, I just had to throw that in there so people knew that it wasn't all butterflies and unicorns.
No, it's not.
All right, brother. Hey, man, I love you. I appreciate you.
Dude, I love you too, brother. This was awesome.
Thanks, man. See you, bud.
All right, take care, dude.